They pulled her over, planted drugs in her car, and laughed as they took her into custody. What they didn't realize was that she was a DEA agent, ready to turn their world upside down. The late afternoon sun blazed across the horizon, casting long shadows over the two-lane highway winding through rural Georgia. Monica Trenton tapped her fingers against the steering wheel of her black Dodge Charger, her eyes darting between the road and her rear-view mirror. After a long day in court as a key witness in a federal drug case, she was itching to get home. Yet, something felt off. A black and white patrol vehicle had been following her for the last 5 miles. No lights, no sirens, just lingering presence. Maintaining a steady speed of 55 miles per hour as the limit was posted every few miles. Monica exhaled slowly. She understood the game. During her years as a DEA agent, she'd encountered small-town cops whose egos were inflated and who lacked oversight. Some found joy in stopping out-of-towners, flexing their power over those unaware. But Monica knew better. As she had anticipated, the red and blue lights flashed on. "Here we go," she signaled, eased onto the gravel shoulder, and turned off the engine. Keeping both hands firmly on the wheel, she recalled her training for such stops. Stay calm, maintain control, give them nothing. 2 officers approached her vehicle from either side, one tall and lean, sunglasses perched low on his nose, while the other was stocky, in his mid-40s, with a belly straining against his tan uniform. Their badges glimmered under the dimming light. The tall officer, Ryan Whitmore, tapped on the driver's side window, and she rolled it down slowly. "Good evening, officer. License and registration," he ordered. His voice clipped. Pulling them from the center console, she handed them over. Whitmore barely glanced at them before questioning. "You in a hurry, ma'am?" "Nope. Didn't you see that stop sign a few miles back?" Monica's expression remained unchanged, for there was no stop sign. Whitmore's mouth twitched at the corners, amused. "Step out of the vehicle." Here it came, the escalation. Monica maintained a relaxed posture, her face inscrutable. "On what grounds?" "We'll discuss that outside the vehicle," he replied. Exhaling slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt, stepped out carefully, and closed the door behind her. The gravel crunched beneath her boots. The second officer, Cole Barrett, circled behind her, his hands resting on his duty belt. "Turn around," Barrett commanded. Monica tilted her head. "Excuse me." "Turn around, hands behind your back." Whitmore stepped forward. "You got drugs in that car, don't you?" Monica almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "You're joking, right?" Neither officer smiled. "I'm a federal agent," she replied, her voice steady. "My badge is—" Barrett seized her wrist, and she pulled her arm away. "That's assault on a federal officer," she said. Whitmore's grin faded. "Lady, I don't care who you claim to be. We've got probable cause. You match a description." "A description?" Monica locked eyes with him, fully aware of what that meant. Whitmore turned back to her car, tapping on his radio. "Dispatch. We've got a suspicious vehicle. Possible drug transport. Requesting K9. This wasn't a routine stop. They were setting her up. Barrett's hand hovered near his taser. "We're not gonna ask again." Monica's pulse remained steady, though her jaw tightened. She could take them down easily, years of combat survival training at her disposal, but she had to be smart. She needed to play their game for now. Slowly turning around, she placed her hands behind her back. The cold steel of the cuffs pressed into her wrists as Barrett fastened them. They pushed her toward the patrol car, her own badge still in Whitmore's hand, without even a glance at it. Leaning in close, Whitmore whispered, voice low and smug, "Welcome to Wilkins County, sweetheart." But they had no clue who they were dealing with. Monica was no stranger to the back seat of a patrol car. She'd spent plenty of time in them over the years. But never like this. With her hands cuffed and her legs cramped, watching 2 corrupt officers pat each other on the back as if they'd just made the biggest bust of their careers. Outside, Whitmore popped the trunk of her Charger and whistled low before turning to Barrett with a smirk. Well, look what we've got here. Barrett strutted over, knowing what he would find. That's a damn shame, Monica thought. She didn't need to see it to know drugs were planted. Probably meth or fentanyl. Something easy to justify. Something that would stick. Whitmore pulled out a vacuum-sealed brick and held it up. You were saying something about being a federal agent? Barrett shook his head with a grin. Ain't that funny? Looks like we've got ourselves a trafficker instead. Monica's fingers curled into fists behind her back. This wasn't sloppiness. It was routine. They'd done this before. Pick a target, plant evidence, and let the system devour them whole. She kept her breathing steady. Being outnumbered wasn't new to her. Whitmore swaggered toward the car, arms resting on the window frame as he peered inside. Now, sure you had a badge, but I ain't ever heard of a DEA agent running kilos through my county, right, Cole? Barrett chuckled. She thought flashing a fake badge would save her. Monica's lips barely moved. Read the damn badge. Genius. Whitmore smirked. Oh, I read it. Real or not, it don't matter. Guess what? In about 24 hours, that fancy DEA title ain't gonna mean a damn thing. She tilted her head, watching him. That right? Oh yeah, Whitmore replied. Once we get this booked, once your face is plastered all over the news, no one's gonna care who you say you are. You're just another criminal. And in this town, sweetheart, you don't get to win. Monica's stomach tightened, not with fear, but with rage. They really believed they could bury her, that no one would come searching, that she was just another face, another victim. A small smile crossed her lips, enough to make Whitmore pause. You find this funny, he snapped. Monica's voice was calm and deliberate. I think you're an idiot. Whitmore's expression fluctuated slightly. Barrett flung the door open. That's enough. Get her out. The cuffs bit into her wrists as they dragged her from the car. The parking lot outside the Wilkins County Sheriff's Office was mostly deserted, save for a few squad cars. The building itself was small, one of those backward stations where things simply disappeared. People, paperwork, entire cases. Whitmore shoved her forward. Let's go inside. The air inside was stale, heavy with burnt coffee and cheap aftershave. A grizzled desk sergeant barely raised an eyebrow as they entered. What's this? Trafficker, Barrett stated, sliding Monica's badge across the counter. Fake DEA credentials. The sergeant picked it up and squinted at it. Ha! Booking her in now, Whitmore added. The sergeant exhaled, clearly disinterested. Put her in holding, too. Whitmore grabbed Monica's elbow, steering her toward a hallway lined with holding cells. The walls were cinder block, cold and unforgiving. He leaned in close. This is where you start thinking about how badly you messed up. She didn't blink. I'm not the one who messed up. Whitmore grinned. We'll see about that. The cell door clanged shut. Monica sat on the metal bench, rolling her shoulders. She wasn't worried about getting out. That was inevitable. No. She was focused on how to make them pay, but first, she needed to let them dig their own graves a little deeper. Monica sat on the cold metal bench, her back straight and her expression unreadable. The concrete walls surrounding her were stained with time, and the air was thick with old sweat and poor decisions. She'd been in places like these before, but never on the wrong side of the bars. Across the cell, a young black man in his early 20s sat on the floor, knees drawn up, his head resting against the wall. He glanced at her with cautious eyes. You knew? He asked. Monica smirked. Something like that. He nodded, rubbing a fresh bruise on his cheek. Let me guess. Whitmore and Barrett? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The young man chuckled bitterly. Yeah, they got me too. Monica tilted her head. For what? He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You name it. They said my tail light was out, pulled me over. Suddenly, I had a suspicious amount of cash on me. I work at a damn warehouse. saving up for months. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny thing is, by the time we got here, that cash was gone. Monica's jaw clenched. So this was routine. Whitmore and Barrett weren't just dirty. They were predators, hunting individuals who couldn't fight back. She leaned forward slightly. How long have you been in here? 3 days, he muttered. No call, no lawyer. My mom doesn't even know where I'm at. Monica's pulse quickened. 3 days was long enough for things to get lost in the system. She was done waiting. Standing up, she stretched her shoulders, releasing the tension. The cuffs were gone now, a small victory, but she was still locked in a cell. And that wouldn't work. Taking a step toward the thick iron bars, she glanced toward the front desk. A single deputy sat there, flipping through paperwork, barely paying attention. Then, the familiar heavy footsteps of Whitmore and Barrett echoed as they approached. The young man beside her tensed. Here we go. Whitmore stopped in front of the bars, grinning like a man who believed he'd already won. He tapped the metal with his knuckle. How's it feel, sweetheart? Monica met his gaze. Like a joke. Barrett chuckled. Oh, it's real. Real enough that you're not leaving anytime soon. Monica tilted her head. You sure about that? Whitmore crossed his arms. Listen, I get it. You thought flashing that badge meant something, but this ain't the big city. We run things around here. No feds, no fancy lawyers, no backup, just us. Monica slowly took a step forward, her voice even. I wouldn't be so sure. Whitmore grinned. That's so. She exhaled, shaking her head slightly. Amateurs. I'll give you one last chance, she said. Walk back in here, unlock this door, and pretend this never happened. Whitmore burst into loud, mocking laughter. Barrett joined in, shaking his head. You've got some nerve, he said. Monica smirked. No, I've got jurisdiction. Outside the station, screeching tires pierced the air. Whitmore's radio crackled. Sheriff, we've got federal agents at the front entrance asking for a Monica Trenton. Whitmore's grin vanished. Monica moved closer to the bars, tilting her head. You was saying? Barrett grabbed his radio. Who the hell called the feds? Monica smiled at them knowingly. I didn't have to. Whitmore whipped around to glare at her, his face twisted in frustration. You! Before he could finish, the front door of the station swung open, boots clattering on the tile, loud and purposeful. Then came a voice. Where the hell is my agent? Whitmore and Barrett froze, while Monica merely smiled. And just like that, the game was over. The metal doors of the holding cell creaked open with an echoing sound. Monica stepped forward, stretching out the stiffness in her shoulders as a tall black man in a tailored suit awaited her. Deputy Director Raymond Holt of the DEA, a man who rarely left his office unless it was a personal issue. He assessed Monica, then turned his attention to Whitmore and Barrett, his expression unreadable. Both officers froze. Holt's gaze sharpened. I said uncover, now. Barrett hesitated. Sir, she was caught with. Holt's tone sliced through the air like a knife. You've illegally detained a federal agent, falsified evidence, and violated her constitutional rights. You two morons are facing felony charges before the day ends. Whitmore's jaw tightened. This is a mistake. Holt smirked. Oh, I agree. The mistake was thinking you could get away with it. With a metallic clink, Monica's cuffs were removed. She rubbed her wrists, casting Whitmore a long, deliberate look before stepping past him without another word. But she wasn't finished with them yet. Monica took her seat at the defendant's table, calm and composed as she waited. The courtroom exuded an aroma of old wood and stale coffee, just the kind of place where individuals like Whitmore and Barrett believed they were untouchable. Across the room, the two officers sat with their attorney, a local defense lawyer who appeared to prefer anywhere else. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, cleared his throat. Let's begin. The prosecutor stood first, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, the state has charged Miss Trenton with drug trafficking, possession with intent to distribute, and resisting arrest. Monica barely reacted. She aimed for them to feel at ease, to think for just a moment or two longer that they had control. The judge turned to her. Miss Trenton, do you have legal representation? Leaning forward, Monica replied, That won't be necessary, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the room. The prosecutor frowned as the judge nodded. Very well. How do you plead? Monica smiled. Before I answer that, Your Honor, I'd like to present something to the court. She reached into the folder before her and produced a laminated ID, walking it over to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge studied it, his eyebrows lifting. The prosecutor leaned forward, confused. What is that? Setting the ID down with a sigh, the judge looked at Whitmore and Barrett, his expression transforming. This is a federal badge. Turning to the officers, he said, Miss Trenton is a special agent with the DEA. The courtroom fell silent as Whitmore and Barrett's faces drained of color. That's correct, Your Honor, Monica stated smoothly. And should the prosecution want to continue pushing charges against a federal agent who was framed by two corrupt officers, I'd be more than happy to proceed. The prosecutor's face contorted. Your Honor, The judge cut him off with a raised hand. Would you two like to explain yourselves? Whitmore shifted nervously in his seat. Your Honor, we were acting on probable cause. Monica let out a sharp, biting laugh. Probable cause? You had nothing. You pulled me over because you thought you could get away with it. The judge's expression hardened as he turned to the prosecutor. I assume you'll be dropping all charges. The prosecutor, looking pale, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Good, the judge said as he looked back at Monica. Agent Trenton, you're free to go. Instead of sitting back down, she turned to Whitmore and Barrett. Now, let's discuss what happens to dirty cops who frame innocent people. This time, they wouldn't be walking away. Whitmore and Barrett sat rigidly, their hands gripping the edges of the table as if the wood might prevent them from sinking. The color had disappeared from their faces, and their arrogance had been replaced by a fear Monica knew all too well. The judge adjusted his glasses and gazed down at them. Officers, this court takes allegations of corruption very seriously. His voice was firm and steady, capable of making men sweat. Monica faced them completely, arms crossed, having them exactly where she wanted. Taking a controlled step forward, she started to speak. Let's go over what happened, shall we? Whitmore's jaw twitched, but he remained silent. You pulled me over for a non-existent stop sign, she continued. Claimed I matched a description, then planted drugs in my trunk, thinking no one would come searching when you booked me under a false name. Tilting her head, she asked, Did I miss anything? The courtroom held its breath in silence as Barrett opened his mouth to speak, but Monica wouldn't allow it. Wait, I did miss something, she said as she reached into the folder on the prosecutor's desk. Turns out you two aren't just bad cops, you're stupid ones. Holding up a printed bank statement, she continued, The FBI conducted an emergency audit of both your accounts the moment I called it in. Your checking accounts tell a pretty little story, with big deposits, too big for small-town police salaries. Thousands of dollars flowing in at regular intervals, all linked to shell companies associated with drug operations. The prosecutor snatched the papers from her hand, his eyes widening as he read. Monica turned back to the officers, saying, You weren't just framing people, you were getting paid to do it. The courtroom erupted in chaos until the judge slammed his gavel down. Order! Order in the court! Whitmore leapt from his seat. This is nonsense. There's no proof. Raising an eyebrow, Monica responded, No proof. Funny, because my department has wire transfers, phone records, and even footage of Barrett meeting with known traffickers. Barrett paled. That's a lie. Monica gestured toward the entrance just as the doors swung open. A U.S. Marshal entered, accompanied by two men in suits. The lead agent, Special Investigator Troy Dawson, held up a sealed warrant. Judge, we have federal arrest warrants for Officers Ryan Whitmore and Cole Barrett on charges of conspiracy, evidence tampering, and multiple civil rights violations. Wait, you set us up. Whitmore staggered back, horrified. You can't do this. Barrett stood frozen, staring at Monica, his hands trembling as the marshal grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. Cole Barrett, you're under arrest. As the two corrupt officers were escorted away, Monica breathed out slowly. Justice was a long game, but today she had won. Yet there was still one final task to complete. The courtroom cleared rapidly after the spectacle of two corrupt officers being led away in handcuffs. The prosecutor sat slumped at his desk, rubbing his temples, likely wondering how his case had collapsed so swiftly. The judge had already departed, leaving only Monica, Deputy Director Holt, and a handful of federal agents in the typically quiet setting. Holt turned to Monica, arms crossed. You good? She nodded. Yeah. He exhaled. I figured something was off when you didn't check in after court yesterday, and when the station refused to confirm your arrest. I knew we had a problem. Monica smirked. Appreciate the cavalry. Holt shot her a look. You're fortunate you're not in deeper trouble. You should have identified yourself the moment they cuffed you. Monica merely shrugged. It wouldn't have mattered. They were never going to check. Holt rubbed his face in exasperation, shaking his head. You always do things the hard way. She replied. Hard ways yield results. He chuckled dryly. Can't argue with that. Suddenly, the doors swung open again, revealing the young warehouse worker from the holding cell, escorted by a federal agent. His eyes flicked between Monica and Holt. They said I'm free to go. Holt nodded. All charges dropped. Your record will be cleared. The young man exhaled, visible relief crossing his features, but then his expression hardened into something cautious. What about them? He asked, referring to Whitmore and Barrett. Monica understood the unvoiced question, locking eyes with him. They're done. He swallowed hard, nodding. Good. Under his breath and quieter, he added, This happens a lot, doesn't it? Monica didn't lie in her response. Yeah. It does. His shoulders tensed, fists clenching by his sides. But not today, she assured him. Today they lost. That seemed to provide him with reassurance as he offered her a small nod before turning to leave, pausing just before walking out. Thanks, he muttered. Monica watched him disappear down the hall. He shouldn't have needed to thank her. He never should have been put in that position in the first place. Holt placed a hand on her shoulder. Come on, let's get you out of here. But before she could move, the prosecutor's voice broke through the silence. Agent Trenton. She turned to see him still standing there, face ghostly pale. He hesitated before exhaling. You're lucky we uncovered who you were before trial, he admitted. If this had gone any further, Monica raised an eyebrow. I'm not the one who got lucky today. He blinked, and she stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. You didn't ask questions when they brought me in. You took their word, filed the charges, and let me sit in a cell. How many others have you done that to? The prosecutor stiffened, speechless. I'm not seeking an answer, she stated, but you should be. His gaze dropped, and he had nothing more to say. Monica didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked toward the doors, Holt following her. As they stepped outside, the Georgia sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine, and Monica inhaled deeply. Holt nudged her. You ready to go? She smiled. Yeah. There was work ahead because this wasn't just a victory. It was also a warning. And people like Whitmore and Barrett weren't the only ones who needed to hear it. Monica stepped out of the courthouse, the last rays of daylight fading behind the trees. The air felt cleaner out here. Freedom had a scent, and she wasn't going to take it for granted. Holt walked beside her, hands in his pockets, his typical no-nonsense expression softening slightly. They'll be in federal custody by morning, he noted. Prosecutor's office is scrambling to distance themselves from this mess. Monica smirked. They should be. This isn't merely about two dirty cops. It's about an entire system that allowed them to act this way. Holt sighed, shaking his head. You know, this won't be the last time we see this. Monica sighed in agreement. Yeah, but today we put two away. A few feet ahead, a small group had gathered near the courthouse steps. Locals who had likely dealt with Whitmore and Barrett before and never imagined they'd actually see them taken down. Among them was the young warehouse worker again. He stood to the side, hands shoved in his pockets, watching. When their eyes met, he offered her a short nod, respect, gratitude, maybe even hope. That was enough. As Monica turned toward Holt's black SUV, he shot her a knowing glance. So, he began, unlocking the doors. What's next for you? Monica slid into the passenger seat, stretching out her sore wrists. The usual, she said as Holt chuckled and started the engine. Which is? She leaned back, her eyes drifting toward the courthouse in the rear-view mirror, making sure the next Whitmore and Barrett think twice before attempting this again. Some people believe power protects them, that the right badge, the right connections, and the right system provide them immunity from consequences. But justice has a way of catching up. Whitmore and Barrett weren't special. They were merely two more names added to a long list of individuals who thought they could evade accountability until they didn't. Monica recognized this fight wasn't over. There were more out there, more who would misuse the system, more who thought they were untouchable. But that didn't matter because every time they fell, it sent a message. No one is above the law. And for those who thought otherwise, they'd soon discover the truth. If you believe justice should never be optional, ensure you subscribe for more stories like this, share this video, leave a comment, and let's keep exposing the truth together.